Al Franken, in his first interviews after allegations of sexual harassment, says he's embarrassed and ashamed, but will not resign from the Senate. Good evening. I'm Rick Leventhal. You're watching the Fox Report. The Minnesota Democrat talking to local news outlets more than a week after the first accuser came forward. Several other women have spoken out since then, saying Senator Franken inappropriately grabbed or groped them while taking photos. Here's how the senator responded.
Did you put your hand on someone's rear end during a photo shoot?
I would never intentionally do that. And so, but that does not negate my intention isn't what is important. What is important is we have to listen to women and respect what they say.
Meanwhile, another embattled lawmaker, Michigan Congressman John Conyers, announces he's stepping aside as the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee. Conyers claims the accusations against him are false, but says he doesn't want to be a distraction to his colleagues. Molly Hennenberg has the latest from Washington. Molly, did House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi tell Conyers to give up his leadership position?
Hi, Rick. We don't know exactly what she said to Conyers privately, but she said publicly today that Congressman Conyers is a, quote, icon who has, quote, done a great deal to protect women. But then she went on to say that she thought he would, quote, do the right thing. A few hours after she said that, Conyers announced he was stepping down as the top Democrat on the powerful House Judiciary Committee as an ethics investigation looks into sexual harassment allegations made by staffers and possible payouts funded by taxpayers. Conyers said today in a statement, quote, I am grateful to my colleagues who have called for due process before weighing judgment. I would urge them to continue to do so for any member accused of wrongdoing. Basic fairness requires no less. Conyers says he looks forward to vindicating himself and his family before the House Ethics Committee. Rick?
And Molly, back to the Franken story. During those interviews today, he said he was shocked by the allegations?
Yes, Senator Franken says these allegations have been embarrassing, difficult, and a, quote, shock to him. Franken, who will return to the Senate tomorrow, says he does not remember groping the women or grabbing them, but he says he apologizes to women, quote, who felt disrespected.
I'm someone who, hugs people. And I've learned from these stories that in some of these encounters, I've crossed a line for some women.
The Democratic senator from Minnesota says he will cooperate fully with an ethics investigation, but he's not stepping down from the Senate. Rick?
And we will have more on Al Franken later this hour. Molly Hennenberg in Washington. Molly, thank you. Congress entering a year-end sprint with lawmakers getting back to work this week. Senate Republicans hurtling toward a vote on tax reform. But there's also the matter of avoiding a government shutdown with a December 8th deadline to pass a spending bill. South Dakota Senator John Thune says there's no reason they can't get it done.
We need to pass a long-term spending bill. Obviously, in the legislative process, the negotiation that will go on between the White House and Democrats in Congress and our leadership in Congress, sometimes you need to do a short-term extension, but ultimately we need to do a bill that funds the government through the end of the next fiscal year and that addresses the important priorities that we need to address. There shouldn't be any discussion about shutting down the government. We can make this thing work.
Caroline Shively has more on this from Washington.
Rick, sometimes Congress just creaks along at a slow pace, and sometimes they ram things through at lightning speed. Judging by their agenda, Republican leaders are planning on some lightning. In the next few weeks, they may vote on taxes, the individual mandate, health care for kids, sexual harassment, and oh yeah, the entire federal government will shut down if they don't pass a spending resolution. The Senate votes on tax reform this week. The House has already passed its version.
I predict we will have a new tax code for the new year and for a new era of American prosperity. We deserve it. Americans deserve a new tax code.
They are doing something that's going to increase the debt enormously. It's going to be a job killer, and it's going to raise taxes on the middle class. And that has a big impact on the individual lives of all Americans.
Democrats are pushing to amend the spending bill, allowing Dreamers to stay. Those are illegal immigrants who came here as minors. Republicans want it handled separately.
We have a fixable priority in the DREAM Act, a bipartisan solution to this problem to make sure that these young people have a chance to earn their way into citizenship. We can do this, and we can get it done before the end of the year.
But it shouldn't be dealt with in the context of a year-end spending bill, and the Democrats using it and trying to use leverage to, to shut down the government. That's not how this ought to be resolved.
Republican leaders say they aren't afraid to keep members here past their scheduled holiday break to finish their work. Rick?
Caroline Shively reporting. Speculation is swirling over a recent decision by the legal team for former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. His lawyers last week cutting ties with President Trump's attorneys, which some analysts say could indicate Flynn is cooperating with prosecutors or seeking some sort of a deal. Former U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara weighed in on the Sunday show State of the Union.
A lot of the reporting suggests that Michael Flynn has a considerable amount of exposure based on his dealings with Russia and not disclosing some of those dealings. And if all of that is true, and he has considerable legal liability, criminal liability, then the way to get yourself off the hook, and in his case, not only himself, but potentially also his son, who's involved in some of this, the only way to do that is to cooperate with the prosecution.
Garrett Cheney is live in Washington. Garrett, how is the president's legal team responding to Flynn's attorneys cutting off contact with them?
Well, Rick, this is something the president's attorneys say they have been expecting. Remember, from the beginning, Michael Flynn has been one of the main targets of special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation, and there has been plenty of evidence to suggest wrongdoing at various levels on his part. So the president's team has long believed it was only a matter of time before charges were brought against him. While that has not happened officially or formally at this point, Jay Sekulow, a member of the Trump legal team, said the prospect of Flynn entering a plea is not unexpected and, quote, no one should draw the conclusion that this means anything about General Flynn cooperating against the president. Instead, they believe any charges against Flynn will likely be related to his lobbying work on behalf of Turkey and have nothing to do with the president or Russia. Some legal experts are also suggesting that even if Michael Flynn had damaging evidence against the president, there are real questions about his credibility.
Given the potential charges against Flynn, including false statements, his credibility is suspect. And I'm not trying to run down a guy who served his country for years, but ultimately when you have to look at this as a prosecutor, to put him on the witness stand against those charges, they're going to need some real corroborating evidence to support his testimony going forward if he agrees to cooperate.
And legal experts say the fact that Flynn's attorneys have ended their information sharing agreement with the president's legal team could mean a number of different things. Most likely, it means that Flynn is now cooperating with investigators and in the process of trying to cut a deal, or it means that he's preparing to plead guilty to forthcoming charges, possibly in order to protect his son, who is also under investigation. Rick?
And Garrett, you briefly mentioned Turkey. What more do we know about some of the work that Michael Flynn did for the Turkish government?
Yeah, well, federal records show that Michael Flynn was paid more than $500,000 for work he did on behalf of the Turkish government. And the Wall Street Journal reports that work included an unfinished documentary about an exiled Turkish cleric named Fethullah Gulen, who now lives in the United States. The Turkish government blames Gulen for a failed coup in the country's capital last year and has called for him to be extradited back to Ankara. The Journal reports that Flynn's consulting firm tried to mask its role in that documentary, and this latest example is just one part of a larger probe by federal investigators to determine if Flynn improperly hid financial ties to both Turkey and Russia. Rick?
Garrett Cheney in Washington. Garrett, thank you.
You got it.
Right now, authorities investigating the cause of a massive explosion at a factory overseas. At least 2 people were killed, what we know so far. Plus, Egypt in mourning after gunmen killed hundreds of worshipers inside a mosque. What it means for the evolving fight on terror.
We know that ISIS Sinai wants to carry out attacks across Egypt. They'd like to unravel Egypt. They'd like to see civil war. Egypt is the big prize for them. 97 million people. They'd love to get a foothold.
Two people killed and at least 30 others hurt in a factory explosion near Shanghai. The blast knocked down several nearby buildings and left the streets littered with debris in the port city of Ningbo. Fortunately, the damaged buildings were empty. China suffers frequent fires and industrial accidents, often blamed on negligence, but the cause of this explosion is still under investigation. Palestinians standing with Egypt as it reels from an assault on a mosque that killed more than 300 people, the deadliest terror attack in modern Egyptian history. Here's what it looked like in the West Bank, with Palestinians showing solidarity with the victims and sending a message of defiance to those responsible.
The Palestinian figures and factions who are coming today to show first sympathy with the families and to send their condolences to the families of the victims, but in the same time to have a stand against the terror which is trying to shake Egypt.
Connor Powell has the latest from Jerusalem.
Rick, as Egyptians mark a weekend of mourning for the 305 people that were killed on Friday, Egyptian authorities are starting to get a better picture of what exactly happened in the small village of Bir al-Abed. According to village locals, ISIS militants have regularly threatened the moderate Sufi Muslim community, warning them not to cooperate with Egyptian security forces. Sufi Muslims are despised by extremists and viewed by groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS as apostates. Around noon on Friday, more than 24 well-armed militants waving ISIS flags attacked the Al-Rada Mosque, first setting off a bomb and then gutting down many of the 500 or so worshippers who were trying to flee to safety.
The assailants were targeting anybody and everybody. Anybody who was breathing.
Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi vowed this weekend that the attack would not go unpunished. And the Egyptian military launched airstrikes in the mountains of the Sinai Desert. For 3 years, President Sisi has promised to end the wave of violence unleashed by ISIS. This attack shows just how easily ISIS, though, is able to operate in the Sinai Desert, and just how ineffective Egyptian security forces are. Rick?
Connor Powell reporting. President Trump being blamed for the Obamacare rate hike by some. Is that fair? Details on the increase in place before his term began. And why one expert is saying you can get those Cyber Monday deals throughout the holiday season.
In the past, people would wait till they got to work to do their shopping because they wanted their employer's high-speed internet. Now your cell phone is just as fast as your employer's computer, so that's going to be dispersed over the holiday shopping period. But yet, there will be good sales on Cyber Monday.
Online retailers are ready to slash prices as we're just hours away from the start of Cyber Monday. And now we're hearing those companies may be willing to let the good times roll.
I think Cyber Monday is exciting. I think what's cool, though, is we're actually going to see sales throughout December. So I don't think if you miss something on Cyber Monday, don't lose hope. I think retailers are going to keep the momentum going all the way through December.
Cyber Monday comes as online stores hope to duplicate the record-breaking success they had this year on Black Friday, when consumers reportedly smashed internet sales by about $1 billion. Health insurance premiums are soaring for 2018. Democrats blaming President Trump for the hikes, but these Obamacare increases were expected long before President Trump was elected. Dan Springer reports.
As Americans sign up for next year's health insurance coverage, those on the Obamacare exchange are seeing higher premiums, just as they did a year ago when President Obama was still in office, and premiums were up on average 25%. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation, premiums in 2018 are rising an average of 18% for gold and bronze plans and 32% for silver plans. President Trump blames the law, tweeting last month, "As usual, the Obamacare premiums will be up. The Dems own it. But we will repeal and replace and have great health care soon after tax cuts." But many Democrats say it's really Trump's fault. California's insurance commissioner Dave Jones wrote, 2018 health insurance rates higher thanks to Trump and Republicans. In Washington state, they're calling it sabotage.
All of the negative things that the Trump administration has said since he came into office has affected the market overall. It's made it unstable and created a lot of uncertainty. And that's something that health insurers don't like.
President Trump did cut off cost-sharing subsidies or direct payments to insurance companies after a federal judge ruled them illegal because Congress never approved them. And that is partially impacting the cost of silver plans. But premiums have gone up each year since the law passed, mainly because insurers are paying out more than they're taking in.
It's Obamacare's regulations that have more than doubled premiums over the last 4 or 5 years. And it's the sloppy drafting of Obamacare that led to the illegal cost-sharing subsidies that the Obama administration has been spending without the authorization of Congress.
Despite the oftentimes confusing blame game, consumers are cutting through it all and figuring out what works for them. And because tax credits are also increasing, the vast majority of those on the exchange aren't paying any more for premiums. Still, the 7-year-old law remains a political football that gets passed at every sign of trouble. In Seattle, Dan Springer, Fox News.
The situation in Puerto Rico remains critical 2 months after Hurricane Maria ravaged the American island. Power outages are still widespread across the U.S. territory, and clean water is scarce. The conditions are driving residents to leave Puerto Rico, sending a surge of people into Florida. Steve Harrigan picks up this story in Kissimmee, Florida.
The old without medicine are coming, the young without classrooms, and those in between.
I don't have nothing.
Nothing in Puerto Rico 8 weeks after Hurricane Maria means no house, power, phone, internet, no road. Stephen grew specialty hot peppers and cilantro.
I'm kind of stuck in there. I mean, you know, I produce hydroponically as well. So without light, water issues, I can't even really produce.
A farmer without light or water who's come to Orlando with 2 pairs of pants and a shirt.
Starting from zero. We're starting from zero.
The 2-month blackout on the island has driven more than 156,000 U.S. citizens from Puerto Rico to Florida, according to Florida's Division of Emergency Management. One-stop shopping centers have been set up to provide housing, medical care, food, and employment. The surge is straining local resources, especially schools, where dozens of new students without transcripts arrive each day.
So they're just showing up at your doorstep every day?
Every day. We enrolled 72 yesterday.
2,500 new students in Osceola County, more than 80% of whom don't speak English. Some arrive alone. Each new student costs the district roughly $28,000, an unbudgeted expense of more than $70 million, say school officials.
And it's adding like 2 elementary schools to our population that we were unable to plan for and project.
Even before the storm, Puerto Ricans were fleeing a debt-ridden economy at the pace of 80,000 a year from an island whose population is just 3.5 million. But now that flight has turned desperate. 500,000 Puerto Ricans are expected to come to Florida in the next 4 years to join the 1 million already here. Some may be starting from zero, but the dramatic demographic shift has the potential to create a new force in Florida politics. In Kissimmee, Florida, Steve Harrigan, Fox News.
Al Franken says he hopes to regain the trust of constituents as he finds himself at the center of a firestorm over sexual harassment on Capitol Hill. Where the senator goes from here. Plus, Roy Moore defying calls to exit the Alabama special election amid allegations of sexual misconduct. The latest on that race and what a Moore victory could mean for the president and the GOP.
This is all about politics, and that's why when politicians talk about this, it doesn't have a lot of credibility. This has been going on in politics for a very long time. Democrats try and defend their own, Republicans try and defend their own.
Email bombshell.
Had the information been released, there would have been harm to national security.
As a federal watchdog, he knew everything about the classified documents. Now, Monday, Charles McCullough speaks out for the first time inside the real risks of her private server and the personal threats if Hillary was held accountable.
But we would be the first 2 to be fired with her administration.
Now, hear it all.
What should the American public know about those 22 top secret Clinton emails?
The exclusive interview you can't afford to miss, only on Tucker Carlson Tonight.
I'm Rick Leventhal, and this is the Fox Report. If you're just joining us, President Trump has now arrived back in Washington after spending the holiday weekend at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Palm Beach. He'll be meeting with Senate Republicans Tuesday as they prepare to vote on their version of the GOP tax plan. And that's not the only thing on the agenda. Lawmakers are also up against a December 8th deadline to pass a spending bill to keep the government up and running. The House is also set to vote on a new resolution requiring all personnel to go through sexual harassment training. Meanwhile, one of the lawmakers under fire for harassment is now speaking out. Minnesota Senator Al Franken telling local media he's ashamed and embarrassed, but not stepping down.
The Ethics Committee is looking into all this, and I will cooperate fully with it. Listen, I know I have a lot of work to do to regain the trust of people I've let down. The people of Minnesota, my friends and supporters and my colleagues, and especially everyone who counts on me to be a champion and ally of women.
Joining me now is Morgan Chalfant, reporter for The Hill. Morgan, good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
Your reaction to Al Franken's interview?
It's certainly a major moment. Al Franken has been silent for about 8 days. This is him coming out and really addressing those allegations publicly. He's certainly saying he's ashamed, taking blame for what happened, though at the same time saying he doesn't really recall some of the photographs that were taken in those instances the same way that the women have recounted them. But I think the major question is this going to be enough for Democrats, for progressive groups that have called on Franken to resign? He certainly says here he's ready to get back to work and won't step down, but it will remain to be seen whether or not there will be more calls for his resignation, especially if more allegations like this come to light.
He said today that this was not something that he would intentionally do, but the acts as described don't sound accidental.
Right. Certainly his explanation has kind of walked the line between saying that the accounts are exactly what happened and accusing the women of lying. He's certainly not doing that, but he's really trying to emphasize that he didn't mean the way that these women felt, but at the same time saying he's apologizing for making them feel that way. So he's certainly walking a fine line in the way that he's answered to these accusations, obviously apologizing to the first woman who came out, Leanne Tweeden, and she has accepted his apology as well. So certainly he's emphasizing that.
But we didn't hear a flat-out denial, and the women's stories sound pretty similar, almost more like a pattern than an accident.
Right. There have been a few women, and several of those accounts have been recounted anonymously, some to the Huffington Post. But yes, Franken isn't denying what actually happened. He's just saying he doesn't remember those encounters. I think one other important point from that interview today is that he was asked whether or not he expects there to be more allegations, and he basically indicated that he didn't know and that he hoped not. So I think it definitely leaves the door open. I think he's being very careful there, because if he is truthful in saying that this wasn't what he intended and that he didn't remember them these ways, then I think he's perhaps worried that more people will come out and this behavior will be brought to light.
Morgan, based on the allegations and on the photo that Leanne Tweeden released, is it offensive on any level to hear him describe himself as an ally of women?
I mean, I think that he's certainly trying to, again, as I said, walk the line between saying that he's an ally of women and taking responsibility for his actions. So I think that Leanne Tweeden obviously accepted that apology. I think other people will respond probably differently. There will be varying reactions to the way that Franken has handled everything.
Yeah, I guess the question is whether it's forgivable or not.
Right, and I think that we'll see, again, varying reactions to that. I think there will be people that say that they forgive him and that he, is basically welcoming this ethics investigation and taking blame, and I think there will be others that will continue to call for his resignation and call for him to step down.
You're down in Washington, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the buzz down there about Representative John Conyers today?
John Conyers making a big statement today saying that he's going to step down from his post as the top Democrat on the Judiciary Committee. It's certainly a major step, especially given that Conyers has denied the allegations that have been brought to light in media reporting about settlements that have been made with staffers that have alleged sexual harassment. I think that it's clear that Conyers will continue to receive scrutiny with an ethics investigation pending. And I think that it's definitely going to be a point of focus, especially this week with the House voting on that resolution for the anti-sexual harassment training.
Yeah, you talked about Al Franken walking a fine line today. Nancy Pelosi on Meet the Press this morning, she walked a pretty fine line too as far as Conyers is concerned.
Absolutely, yes. She stepped far short of criticizing Conyers. Saying there are one or two accusations and saying that he's an icon and been a champion for women. So certainly Nancy Pelosi not coming out and criticizing Conyers, but at the same time saying she believed and hoped he would do the right thing. Then you have him hours later, of course, stepping down from that position. So I think we're going to continue to see him examined as this ethics investigation continues. Again, like Franken, the question is, will more of these accusations surface? Will he continue to have to, deny them? Will he come out and show some sort of guilt, perhaps? Major questions, especially with those accusations coming out more recently against Conyers.
Morgan, you mentioned a possible vote this week on mandatory sexual harassment training in Congress. It seems like it might be a little late for that.
Well, I think this is their attempt, obviously, at trying to stem the criticism, the outrage over all of these allegations. This is something that's been optional in the past, but obviously they're trying to make a statement with this resolution. Of course, it's one of the many things that Republicans in the House are focusing and the Senate are focusing on in coming weeks. Certainly there's a major agenda, and this is just another thing that they've added to it. So I think it's going to be a very, very busy end to November and beginning to December.
But it almost feels like we're seeing a sea change down in Washington.
It's certainly these accusations and these women coming out and so publicly, it cuts across various fields. I mean, we've seen it first in entertainment with Harvey Weinstein, in politics, the reporting field as well. A lot of accusations made there. So I think it's almost sort of a moment in the culture where we're having this big shift towards women, coming out and feeling emboldened and being able to tell their stories. I don't think this is something that's going to go away. I think it's certainly been a major point of focus in recent weeks, and again with this vote this week, it's clear that Congress is going to be putting the spotlight on it, and obviously with these ethics investigations ongoing as well.
Well, Morgan, we started with Al Franken. Let's finish with Al Franken. Is it your sense that he may or he will survive this test?
I think it's a little too soon to tell at this point. Clearly, he is saying he's ready to get back to work and prove to people that they can trust him again and regain their trust. He's very openly, accepting blame in a way and saying that he's ashamed and really just making a point to try to move past this. But I think that it really depends on whether or not his allies, groups that have already called on him to resign, whether they're going to step up those calls, whether Democrats are going to stand by him. I don't think that he's out of the woods yet. Obviously, Al Franken, these accusations started to come out right when senators left town. So this will be the first week where they're really back. And I think that will we'll know some things in coming days, but I don't think he's quite out of the woods yet.
Yeah. Okay. Morgan Chalfant, we appreciate your time tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Monday is the deadline for people living in Alabama to get registered to vote in the upcoming Senate election. The highly publicized contest pits Republican Roy Moore against Democrat Doug Jones. President Trump blasting Jones on Twitter and offering some indirect support for Moore. Senator John Thune of South Dakota says the president should have a very different message.
The president obviously can speak for himself, and I think he sees the specter of a Democrat holding that seat and what that might mean for his agenda. But the alternative, as I said, isn't good either, Chris. And so as far as I'm concerned, the president, to the degree that he wants to use his influence in this race, could, I think, help everybody out by doing what he can to try and get Roy Moore to step aside.
Marianne Rafferty has more on this from Los Angeles. Marianne, how confident is Doug Jones tonight that he can beat Roy Moore?
Well, hi, Rick. One thing is for certain, Doug Jones didn't waste a good opportunity to get out there and talk to voters just before Auburn pulled off a big win against the Crimson Tide. The Democrat was busy campaigning tailgate style, using the big Iron Bowl rivalry to remind voters out there that he needs their support to score his own win against his rival, Roy Moore.
I think we're going to win. That's all I know. We've got a really great, I mean, there are just thousands of supporters that have come out to work for this campaign. We've been talking about all the issues that matter to people from the day one. You get sidetracked on other things, but we've been talking about the economy. We've been talking about health care. Those are the issues that people care about the most, and it's resonated with folks.
And Alabama native Charles Barkley voicing his support for Jones and expressing his thoughts on Moore even before sexual misconduct allegations surfaced.
We got a lot of black people in the state who are amazing people, but to run a campaign with a guy as your chief advocate who is a white nationalist, a white separatist, that should have disqualified Roy Moore way before this women's stuff came up.
Now, Barkley never fully endorsed Jones, but as you saw there, he made his opinion pretty clear to everyone. Rick?
Marianne, if Doug Jones wins, it could impact the balance of power in the Senate.
Well, that's right. If Jones wins, it would mean an even narrower margin for Republicans in the Senate, which currently stands at 51 to 49. But despite what happens in the battle for this Alabama Senate seat, Republicans are forging on, hoping to push through the tax reform bill before the end of the year. Now, President Trump also weighing in on the importance of this race, tweeting earlier today, "I endorsed Luther Strange in the Alabama primary. He shot way up in the polls, but it wasn't enough. Can't let Schumer Pelosi win this race. Liberal Jones would be bad." Meanwhile, we haven't seen much of Republican Senate candidate Roy Moore the past couple of days in the wake of sexual misconduct allegations, but he does have plans to hold a rally tomorrow in Fort Payne, Alabama. This is going to be the first one since November 16th, when he didn't allow reporters to ask any questions about the allegations against him. We'll see if he addresses the allegations this time around. Rick?
In just a couple weeks till that special election. Marianne, thanks very much. What we're learning about the servicemen who lost their lives when their plane crashed in the Philippine Sea, and the mystery surrounding the death of the Texas Border Patrol agent who's now been laid to rest.
The ultimate sacrifice. Others.
It's our duty and honor to do so. But it's not just for us, it's for the nation itself, because we've lost another guardian of our borders, and it's not right.